Okay, so as it turns out, Dratnos, Warlocks were actually just lying, and Warlock was just good even without PI. Who could have possibly foreseen that Warlock is actually strong in Sepulchre, the first ones, with and without power infusion?
Good thing we buffed Destrolock.
Shit. Yeah, thank God Destro Warlock got a buff. Anyways, okay, so what are we talking about today? So, I think that you and I, at least, and have seen a lot of outcry on the community based around class tuning in regards to specs, more often than not aimed at like DPS specializations, but I've even seen it in relationship to both tanks and healers. But a lot of the outcry is in regards to class balance. And so people talk a lot about class balance. I feel like there's a lot of pretty bad takes, but at the same time, I do think that there's a lot of interesting things in terms of like philosophically from like a meta level about class balance. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, so let's start off by just saying like this is about PvE only and not PvP. We are not experts at all on the PvP side of things, and so that out the window. It is one of the things that's true about this game, though, right? Is that like when they balance a spec, they do have to kind of think about a lot more than just any one part of the game. There's also M+ and Raid that both need to be thought about. So it is inherently a very hard problem. But yeah, this patch, we've seen a number of these sort of small to medium-sized adjustments to certain specs, including some that have maybe had slightly different philosophies than others, such as the Blood Death Knight versus Guardian Druid, different approaches that those two specs received. Blood Death Knight, of course, we had the announcement a couple weeks ago of the gutting of the two-piece that then changed to a much more moderate nerf that really didn't hurt the spec too much at all. But then Guardian Druid, which got several nerfs to the Architect's Aligner to the point where it's potentially the weakest tank right now, or tied down there with with stuff like Warrior.
It got slammed with like, what was it, like a 50% nerf, and the Architect's Aligner then got reduced damage by after 5 targets. You're like, oh my god. It
got soft capped to 8, then it got soft capped to 5. It got its damage cut by like 20%. It got damage cut by 20% again, something like that. Like there was a lot of nerfs that were owed to that. The thing is, like, it did deserve something from where it started, but I think that the more recent way that the Blood one was handled was really positive. I think that this nerf instead is a great way to do a nerf such that people don't feel like their character's kind of been pulled out from under them. Sure. And it does seem like, the way that the sort of community is thanked in it does make you kind of worry, like, oh, is the nerf or buff that's going to happen to my class going to be based on like how much community outcry there is for that kind of class? Because like Guardian didn't get any of that, but maybe if it had, it would have there would have been something where it's like, okay, we're going to nerf this in a slightly different way or slightly less intensely.
I mean, there's actually something very legitimate to be said about population size. So like on Wowhead, they actually do like these weekly article series talking about like Shadowland and DPS rankings across like across the seasons, and there definitely is something to be considered with like population size and like how much sway or outcry you potentially can have. I've definitely seen things like, one of the biggest ones is like the Fury Warriors, whenever they got, was it Convergence of Fates nerfed, I think is what it was, or something weird. They were all in Discord like in 2017 screaming.
This is literally a Moonkin speaking, who whenever there's Moonkin nerfs announced, they immediately call the Owl Conclave and are formulating their PR approach to try and get the nerfs reverted.
It hasn't worked yet, but it will at some point.
It doesn't work. Okay, it doesn't look on the meters there, but if you look at like representation, which is another statistic that is potentially important, like there's still a lot of Moonkins killing bosses.
Look at the population size.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, Moonkin is it number 1? It is number 1. Yeah. I mean, it's number 1 most represent. Obviously, Destro and Demo have.
Right.
Yeah, but like, I mean, Moonkin is definitely one of the most represented specs. Okay, anyways, so let's talk about tuning philosophies just in general. Are you happy with how Blizzard is tuning classes right now? Yes or no?
I would say generally, yeah. I think that this has been a good balance patch mostly.
Okay, and so what if I was to bring you to the data that from top to bottom, there is a 26% delta on during Sepulchre right now, and that is twice as big as it was in Sanctum of Domination. How would you feel about that?
Yeah, so Warlocks are doing quite a bit of damage. Again, those top targets are PI and Fairies targets, which does affect things a little bit.
It's not just Destro. It's not just Destro, by the way. Like if you cut Destro down,
Right.
Demo is still like something like 22% or something like that, which is still almost double what it was in Sanctum.
Yeah, but again, I come back to representation stats, right? Where it's like, okay, like if we have balanced Druid looking where it is down here at the bottom, and yet there's still, every top guild is playing at least one. My guild only played one on Jailer, and we were, I think, one of the first guilds to do that, to cut to one Moonkin.
Yeah, sure.
Like that. The specs are bringing useful stuff that is different than just their damage on like 99th percentile, 95th percentile Warcraft log. Type stuff. We're telling Moonkins to go bear form and outrange healers and do that kind of Moonkin work on that boss, right? So it's going to be reflected on these stats, and in particular, this stat that you're looking at, damage done in particular, like this is going to be heavily skewed by which specs are doing good cleave on fights where that's available.
This is the bosses.
Yeah, this is to bosses. You can see things are a little bit less skewed here, right? Except for obviously Windwalker that is doing 0 DPS to bosses. But I come back to like, I feel like this has been a reasonably good patch for, in Raid in particular, playing the specs of like the people on your Raid roster that you want to play, and and then I think DPS is certainly where it's worst, because if you look at healers, it's like, oh, all 6 healer specs are good. You can play Jailer comps with any 5 healer specs and it'll work. My guild did that. You could stack a little bit, and there's some specs like Holy Priest that are a little bit more stackable, but it's really, really good there. And tanks also, like, okay, maybe Blood DK is a little bit of an outlier, but that got a nice nerf that I think was the kind of nerf that makes a lot of sense to do mid patch, where it's like, okay, it's probably still the best tank, but it's less bad to be playing something else. So yeah. Overall, like if you told me I'm getting this patch, or I have to pick like the balance of another one of the previous 5 patches at random, I would take this in a heartbeat.
That makes sense. Okay, so I actually slightly agree, slightly disagree. And so so the stuff that they've hit here, okay, I saw a lot of outcry with like this balance.
Yeah, the 4% stuff.
Here's the thing. None of the specs that I saw here that got tuning, I really just sat there and was, okay, maybe Windwalker, but like, I'll explain in a second. I didn't sit here whenever I looked at these and was like, okay, these are unjust for all of these specs. However, I think that like, it's not like, oh yeah, none of these specs needed to get buffed in some way, is what I thought. I will say though, that it wasn't encompassing like all of the problems with this in particular. And I think that that's where I'm running into issues, is that it's definitely not indicative of like what actually the balance discrepancies are. It's only just like cherry picked a couple of specializations that, sure, they were underperforming and they definitely did need buffs, but first and foremost, 4% is not going to change anything. First off, like you're never gonna see like a middle of patch hot fix tuning thing that's going to meaningfully change a spec from bottom quartile and then bump them all the way up to top quartile. That's never going to happen. You're not going to see a spec that's like randomly buffed by 15% in the middle of the patch. If you do, something has gone wrong. However, whenever like these 4% buffs are like more often than not metrically okay, but the issue is like class tuning is a lot more than just metric-driven data. So sure, you could be like, oh yeah, these specs are only 4% behind like the middle of the pack. We should only buff them by 4%. But in reality, Windwalker Monk is, hold on, let's go back to single target damage, 15 to 20% behind the second worst. Okay, not 15, but like 8% behind the second worst pure single target damage to boss spec. And
again, though, that's going to be skewed by the fact that like you're not bringing Windwalkers for damage. Good players aren't playing Windwalkers on single target fights, and on the fights where you bring them, they're holding cooldowns for AOE.
Yeah, sure, like but at the same time, like they did need a buff, but it wasn't ever to like their aura. And I think that Blizzard has moved way too much into this aura buff nerf stuff. And I know that whenever it was initially thrown out there, they were like, yeah, this is just another knob that allows us to kind of tune some specs. And for some specs, it does make sense to just hit them with an aura buff. At the same time, it doesn't make sense for stuff like Windwalker. It did not make sense for Destro Warlock. Dude, this 5% increase
that one was
on Destro,
pretty offensive. Yeah. Okay. So the context is like there they basically nerfed all the specs that weren't seeing any play in Race the World First. It was what happened on that on that balance week, which turns out the Destro was like already pretty good, and then they nerfed demo after that, and Yeah, it's actually that one was probably a little bit of an oopsie, but like that's the thing, right? When you're talking about like, oh, these changes are small, like 4% changes don't change anything, but if you think a 5% buff to Destro was offensive,
it was.
Like you can understand.
It was offensive,
right,
but it wasn't the problem.
You can understand why they'd be worried about doing big buffs and nerfs, right? Like you're saying, okay, 4% is not enough to change anything, but 5% was bad on Destro because like that spec was already good. So like that's why they got to be so worried about buffing specs by large amounts, right? Is like, it turns out that a lot of the times, even if something looks like it's 20% worse on the metrics, if you give it a 10% buff, like, oh, now it's going to look like it's 20% better because everybody swaps to it, everybody starts catering to it. These kinds of things.
And I actually didn't think that this like really moved the needle. I thought that Destro was good and advanced, and this was just like an egregious mistake to buff them in general. That was more of my issue with it. At the same time, yes, I agree with what you're saying. The counterpoint is that they are not hotfix buffing or nerfing specializations in particular fast enough. And I think that this is like the biggest issue for me, is like, sure, we've seen some tuning. I think that we've seen more tuning than typical. I think we've had like 3 or 4 tuning passes at this point. I think it's only 3, but at the same point, it still feels like things are they're quick to develop metas, and at the same time, things feel out of line right now more than they normally do. And that's due to a wide variety of reasons. That's due to the 4 set. That's due to double legendary. I don't expect Blizzard to know in advance like everything that's going to happen in a meta, but I would like to see them be more involved in buffing or nerfing things than what we necessarily saw here, which was the most recent round of changes where 5 specs got a 4% buff and DK got like kind of crapped on, and then Outcry made them get, this is a reasonable nerf. Like I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, this was unjust. This is a reasonable nerf.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the counterpoint to that is that like in an MMO, right? If you grind Cosmic Flux on a character for a month, right? You'll like gear it up. You've chosen it because you think it's going to be the best at something, and then like balance changes come and change that mid-patch. Like that can be a moment of quitting a patch or a game. And so like inherently they do need to be a little bit more careful than in like a MOBA, right? Of doing too many balance changes too aggressively. I do think in particular, like Mythic Plus, Destro Warlock, Mythic Plus Survival Hunter are specs that they could look at right now and take down a reasonable notch and buff some, underperformers as well to kind of increase some equality there. But looking particularly when it comes to raid, this tier more than ever was one where we really did just look at our people and play the people that were like geared and that we wanted to play on fights. And I think that is like a really good place for like class balance to not be something that you're too worried about, like you have been in some previous tiers. This
is certainly a tier of niches where like if you're strong at like one thing, you're definitely going to be brought, because there's like a lot of 3-person groups, 5-person groups that are doing like 1 or 2 specific things on boss encounters, and they are very valuable at those specific things, especially like cooldown assignment, AoE versus like single target cleave. Like you're really trying to pick and choose like where you want those DPS. And so in raid, I do think I would tend to agree. I do personally think that the band is a little bit too high right now, and something that you brought up was like that comment about you don't want somebody to gear up their character and then feel like that was all moot. I don't think that they should actually like try to rearrange the order of these classes, but I do think that the band at which we're currently seeing it is certainly a little bit high for raid, but it's aggressive. It's aggressively bad for Mythic Plus, and I think that personally the Mythic Plus tuning is a big miss. But like, how should Blizzard even fix that?
I will say that again, you got to be really careful with the statistics, because the statistics always overemphasize like the best thing looks better than more than it actually is.
I agree.
The worst things look worse than more than they actually are the worst. But yeah, it's I mean, it's true that it's not perfect, but I don't know. I don't think that you reliably are getting much better than this. In like
even though Sanctum and Castle Nathria were both like 10 and 15%, like
right,
10 and 12%.
Those were tiers where I felt much worse about like not having 4 Unholy Death Knights, not having 3 Venthyr Moonkins, like those kinds of things were like, oh god, like but this year we didn't play more than 2 of any DPS specs, and we got a nice rainbow comp.
I would argue that that's due to like encounter design. I think that encounter design has evolved over the course of the expansion pretty heavily. At the same point, I do think that like for raid in particular, they're too slow to make like these 5% balance changes. If we got like 5% buffs or nerfs every couple of weeks, I think that this would be more reasonable. Especially too, like don't
I'm with
change
you on
shit like Windwalker and Destro.
Yeah.
Like that's not where these. Okay, if you think that Destro's single target is underperforming, I would tend to be more in line with that. Okay, this is a fine change. If you want to change like their Chaos Bolt damage or like their single target damage in particular, all right, fine. Same with like Windwalker single target. If you want to change their single target damage, again, fine. Don't just aura buff these specs that are already overperforming in Mythic Plus. Like, come on now.
I will say, like, I'm overall also pretty pleased because we had the set bonuses coming in this patch, right?
Yeah.
So I was pretty worried that we were going to have like bad.
Oh, sure.
And, you got your grievances, sure, but I do think that this has been a pretty good success case of like, okay, we can have set bonuses again without things being horrifyingly broken. Again, M plus aside, but like M plus is often horrifyingly broken, and that just it sometimes be that way, right?
How do you think that Blizzard should tackle Mythic Plus? Because I think it's definitely starting to get to a point where it's no longer. I mean, some people joke and like say that Mythic Plus is a mini game, and there may or may not be legitimacy to those claims. But like, I think it's getting to a point where people are less okay with specs being. I mean, right now, Destro, Lock, and Surf Hunter are doing something in the range of like almost 2x the damage of some of the other specializations in Mythic Plus. Like if you compare, I know this is like Beast Mastery Hunter, Moonkin, Enhanced Shaman to Serve Hunter and Destro Lock, those specs may be doing 2 times the amount of damage. They may be like 75% more damage. And you're like, I mean, that's just, I don't know. I think that most people are starting to get to the point where that's unacceptable.
Yeah, I think it would be good to add like just AoE, like M plus overall to the list of like right now, single target is something that they try to keep within a pretty narrow band. But I think adding like M plus AoE, like M plus overall to that category of something that we really want to be balanced. Because right now, like obviously like some specs have strengths and weaknesses, right? And
yeah, like a Demo Lock in Mythic Plus actually has pretty like definite weaknesses. They're slow to ramp. They're primarily single target damage. They can do some stacked cleave, but they're generally not the best at that. And that, okay, they have some strengths that are single target damage. You're going to crank bosses and kill bosses faster in Mythic Plus in particular, but you're going to be a little bit slower on the trash. And those are definite weaknesses, and that's fine. The issue arises with the Destro Lock. Like, so Mythic Plus is like 75% of the dungeon is AoE, I think is a big part of it as well.
More on Fortified Weeks, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's weird.
I think it should be more of a focus as well, but I also like I think it's pretty close. It is just like doing a little bit of a haircut for Destro and Serve away from being pretty good this season as well in M plus. Like there's a lot of specs that actually pump quite a bit of AoE. It's just like
yeah,
you're always going to see a Hunter or Warlock above them in the meters right now, but like Frost DK, Arms Warrior, Rep Pally, all these specs are like Windwalker Monk, Havoc Demon Hunter. They can do nice amounts of overall. It is just like they're being outshone a little bit right now.
I don't even think it's like. This is definitely not a video where I'm just like, oh yeah, Destro needs to be nerfed. It's more just like on the meta philosophy of it, and I think for me, it's less about like. Who's on top? Like, dude, some specs always going to be on top. That's just like the nature of it. You're going to have metas evolve and form over time. It changes. Some spec is going to be on top. Some specs got to be on the bottom. At the same time, I do think that like the rate at which we were getting this tuning and sometimes the tuning itself, these are like big misses to the point where it's like. Again, it's not that I didn't think that these specs needed buffs or nerfs. It's that they hit about 50% of the things that I thought needed buffs and nerfs, and that to me was like, okay, this is annoying.
Yeah, see, I'm kind of glass half full, where it's like, oh, some patches this you just wouldn't get anything until you'd just be stuck with this the whole time. I will agree with you though that like the aura buffs and nerfs is a challenging thing for them to rely on because you can't like balance M plus and raid differently if you're just buffing Destro by 5%, right? Like you do have to, like they need to be able to target Chaos Bolt or Incinerate or whatever and not hit Rain of Fire.
And they can.
So I agree they should do more of that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like with Feral, it's like all damage increased by 3%, and then they hit like some abilities specifically. Why did this just not read, or whatever, the Destro one just not read Chaos Bolt damage increased by 10% or whatever it was, and that'd be like a 2% buff, or like you could even 15% on Chaos Bolt, not affected in PvP. Because they don't need a buff in PvP. Like it's one of those things. It's like they actually have the ability to not apply these to PvP combat as well. So I don't know. It's really weird. I think that it's definitely something that they do need to think about. In general, I would prefer if it was faster, because that way, like if you knew that you were going to get like at least some level of class tuning every 2 or 3 weeks, I would be more okay with this if I knew that more class tuning was coming at a little bit more rapid rate. But if this is like the remainder of the class tuning that we have for the rest of the expansion, it's like, okay, dude, like, are we leaving Destro? Should I level one of these things? Is this thing going to be 60% better than my spec in Mythic Plus right now? Obviously, that one's out of that one's. It's just a problem because like that one's out of line, so that one's the easiest one to pick on. But I don't necessarily mean that you could literally replace it with any spec ever, and it's just like, do I need to make one of these? Is it going to remain like this, or is it going to slowly be chipped down? Is it going to catch a 5% nerf next week on Rain of Fire or something like that? I don't know.
Yeah. I do think that like predictability and communication about this would be nice for particularly that situation you're talking about of like deciding if it's time to re-roll or not. But I don't know. It's tough because like obviously the more they commit to stuff in advance, the more often they're going to realize that they've committed to something they don't want to do.
I don't know. There definitely is drawbacks too, because then the players are. I mean, we already live in like such a weird buff nerf culture for World of Warcraft in particular, where people just have like massive outcries or swings on like buffs and nerfs that they're looking for specs and classes.
No, I'm just saying to highlight it, right?
Yeah. But, shut up. Anyways, but yeah, no, it's more just like the state of the game is in a weird spot. It's not just class, by the way. It's actually just like bosses too. You see people like outcrying on boss buffs and nerfs all the time. You see people. I mean, dude, people did it with the Mage Tower. You remember that shit?
That's why I tend to try and not worry so much about like what the buffs and nerfs are going to be. I'm just I'm here, you know, sailing on the river that is nerfs and buffs. And if it's like sometimes I feel like the waves are getting too high, things are getting too rough, but I basically haven't felt that way this time.
Yeah, that's probably. I mean, and that makes sense. At the same time, I do wish that there was a little bit more aggressive tuning, especially if you're going to do stuff like randomly make Guardian from like one of the top couple of tanks to pretty mid to bad. Like that was a pretty stark change from the beginning of the patch to like where it currently stands right now. And it's not that it's unplayable. It's more just like, ooh, okay, so you took them from pretty good to terrible, and they very infrequently do something like that, but it's the fact that they are also kind of willing to do it at almost a moment's notice is I do wish the predictability would certainly be increased, and I think that maybe would be what I'm necessarily looking for, not just in general more tuning.
What do you think? Let us know in the comments. Let us know which spec we need to nerf or buff. Let us know that we are really dumb for suggesting that Destro needs to be nerfed, and instead they should just buff every other spec to be as good as Destro. I'm sure that comment's already down there.
I hate those comments, man. I mean, these just aren't. It's not reasonable. Anyways, all right, we'll be back next week with the video. I'll see you guys later.